Biden administration's first-year agenda will rise or fall on the outcome of the next few weeks in Washington. Democrats have power, and some want to use it to the full extent. Others are pushing for a more bipartisan approach. And right now, Senator Jeanne Shaheen is in the middle of it all, but she's taking time to stop by the studio and join us today here on Close Up. Thanks for being here in person, Senator Shaheen.
It's nice to be here in person.
It's great. You know, I'm glad that we're not doing this over Zoom again. So let's start out with Afghanistan. If everything goes according to plan, in a couple of months, we'll be down to a tiny footprint of a U.S. force there to guard the embassy and the airport in Kabul. So it's not a complete withdrawal. But as this war ends, what can Americans say they achieved in Afghanistan?
Well, Adam, I actually think it's more like a couple of weeks before we have fully withdrawn, except for the troops that are guarding the embassy. And you know, the president made his announcement, which I was, at the time, said I was disappointed in, because I do think there are, the Taliban have not kept their side of the agreement for us to pull out. They have continued to attack and create conflict in the country. They have not broken their ties with al-Qaeda. And we are seeing now the efforts by the Taliban to take over the country. So I think we need to watch very closely what happens to make sure that terrorists don't come back in and start operating from Afghanistan again, and do what we can to support the Afghans as they're trying to fight for their country.
You've been outspoken in your support for the Afghan allies, trying to get them visas to come to the United States for those who helped us, who could be at risk now as the Taliban is reascended. Also, the rights of women and girls who've been able to realize more of their human potential with that cover of U.S. protection for that. But if the society there isn't going to innately support those kind of rights, how long should Americans reasonably be expected to stay to try and ensure those things? If it's not going to grow organically, why should we be there?
Well, we will maintain a counterterrorism force someplace, as the military says, over the horizon, so it won't actually be in Afghanistan. They have acknowledged that it will limit our intelligence capabilities, and we will continue to pay for that. So we are still going to be in the region. We are still going to be watching very closely, and my concern is, as we've withdrawn, we will see a huge impact, particularly on women and girls who are really threatened if the Taliban take over in the country. Now, my hope is that the Afghan security forces and the Afghan government can maintain control, and that we will do what we can to support them in that. And I'm also worried about all of those Afghans who helped us in our years in the country. This is something that I've been working on, first with John McCain, going back to about 2010, when we knew that we had a lot of those Afghans in the queue who were not able to come to this country, who were being killed, their families were being killed by the Taliban. And so we need to make sure that those people who were willing to lay their lives and their families' lives on the line to help us in the country are not abandoned now.
Some people draw a parallel to what's happening in Afghanistan now to the American experience in Vietnam. You came of age in the Vietnam era. I think you were a college student back then. It was this searing experience for the nation. You know, caused a lot of domestic trauma, along with the 50,000 American lives lost there, and many more for the Vietnamese. 20 years in Afghanistan, albeit with just a fraction of the American war dead compared to Vietnam. But why do you think the American public has met this conflict with such indifference? You know, it's not the same at all in terms of the impact on the American public.
Well, I think that's exactly the reason, because right now we have an all-volunteer army. We did not have that in Vietnam. It was a draft, and many of my friends were drafted and were lost in Vietnam. The casualty figures in Vietnam were so much higher. Now, anytime we lose someone in the military, it's a tragedy, and we need to try and do everything we can to prevent that. But I think the impact in the country was much greater because Vietnam affected so many more people.
Last question on Afghanistan here. I think it deserves its due. It's a 20-year conflict. Did America lose this war?
Well, we succeeded in reducing the ability of al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups to operate freely in Afghanistan. So that we did. Now we need to stay vigilant to make sure they don't come back into the country and are able to operate again freely. And that's why we're going to maintain a counterterrorism force, and we need to pay attention to what's happening in the region.
The infrastructure bill. You've been working with a group on a bipartisan version. It's going to be slimmer potentially than that $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill that's out there kind of in the distance. Is this really going to get Republican votes? Do you feel like this is going to make it across the finish line?
Well, right now there are 22 Democrats and Republicans, 11 Dems, 11 Republicans who have endorsed this framework. We're working on details right now, but I certainly expect that number to expand as we get final agreement and are ready to bring the bill to the floor, which may happen as early as next week. So I do think we have support for it. I think it's really important. This is the biggest investment in infrastructure in this country's history, $579 billion in new money over the next 5 years. And it's more than double any previous investment. And both Republicans and Democrats understand how important that is to the country. If we're going to stay competitive, as we look at what China is investing, at what India, even Europe is investing, we have only been doing a fraction of that. And we've got to do much better if we're going to stay competitive. And we see it. We see it here in New Hampshire. We just saw this report that came out that had New Hampshire in one of the 10 lowest states when it came to infrastructure. And so we've got to do better.
How are you going to pay for this one? I know that Republicans have opposed sort of more muscular tax enforcement, but borrowing obviously isn't a great option either.
Well, we have a whole range of options that we're still working on, and those will be released as soon as they're final. It doesn't raise taxes, and it doesn't include some of those things that both the White House and Republicans have been opposed to. The White House doesn't want to raise taxes on people earning under $400,000, which I think is the right thing to do. We need to make sure that middle-income Americans are not paying the brunt of what we're doing. And it also doesn't address the tax reform package that was passed in 2017. So I think if we can stay away from both of those, we'll be in good shape. That
reconciliation bill, a lot of Democrats want that instead. Are you and the other centrist senators willing to kind of act as a bloc to say, hey, we're going to get this done? If Senator Schumer sort of tries to pull the rug out from you and say, hey, we're going to go with the giant $3.5 trillion bill.
You know, we just saw what was the framework for the $3.5 trillion bill that was just released on Wednesday. The president came over and met with us to talk about the importance of the investments that are in there, investments in people, which I think are also very important. We need to address the dearth of child care that we have. This has been an issue that I worked on when I was governor over 20 years ago, and we still haven't fixed it, and the pandemic has made it worse. Investments in preschool and early childhood education in community college for people in health care. I was relieved to see the Supreme Court uphold the Affordable Care Act, but now we've got to make it more affordable for people. Investments in family and medical leave, because we know, particularly during the pandemic, how important that is to families. So there are a lot of investments in this plan. I'm still looking at it. I'm still looking at how it's going to be paid for. And but I think those kinds of investments are long overdue in America.
No shortage of epic pieces of legislation to discuss in Washington these days. You supported the For the People Act. Obviously, the Republican filibuster blocked that. A lot of Democrats and progressives would like to see Democrats break the filibuster, throw it out the window, and pass this bill. You said you have reservations about that. Explain why. A lot of Democrats see this as a fundamental need. Why do you think the filibuster is still important enough to keep around?
Well, since I got to the Senate, I've been saying we need to reform the filibuster, and I think we still need to do that, and that's a way that we need to look at that first as we're looking at how to pass the For the People Act. But I have real reservations about totally eliminating the filibuster, because I think it makes it too easy for us then to say, okay, if the Democrats are in control, we're going to pass our own partisan agenda, and when the Republicans come in and they're in control, they undo everything that Democrats have done and vice versa. And I don't think that's good for the country. I think thinking about how we can work together is what we ought to be doing. That's what people expect. That's what the Constitution envisioned. That's what our founding fathers and mothers envisioned. And that's what we should be working on. And it's unfortunate that things have gotten so partisan in the country, and that's now trickling down to states as well.
You say you don't think it's good for the country, but if one side, if the Democrats exercise restraint and only take 50% when it's their turn, and Republicans do not exercise restraint, and Senator McConnell takes 100% when it's his turn to be in charge, that does create an imbalance. So I guess what's stopping you from going the 100%?
Well, I think we're doing pretty good so far. We passed the American Rescue Plan. We have a bipartisan agreement on infrastructure that I think is going to come to the floor and get passed. We're also looking at those investments in people that we talked about. So I think we need to keep working, and the more we can work together, the better it bodes for the future.
This has become a hot topic as the Supreme Court term ended. Some people are saying it's time for Justice Breyer to think about retiring because it'll be easier for Democrats who are in the majority to be able to nominate and appoint a younger replacement. What's your perspective on this? I know you're not somebody who likes to show people the door and say, get out of here, but should Justice Breyer think about retiring?
Well, obviously he has to make that decision. I can't make that for him. But it raises questions about whether the way we have our Supreme Court organized, and I'm not talking about adding people to it. I know that will be the concern that others have, but I think we need to look at ethics on the Supreme Court. One of the things that currently is the case is that they police their own ethics, and we've seen some excesses in that regard. So I think the President's Commission that's taking a look at the Supreme Court is appropriate right now.
All right, Senator Sheen, don't go anywhere. We'll be back for the B block here.